Hello, everybody. Welcome back to English Champion. On this episode, we're looking at a book that has been very popular in the last couple of years of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves, subtitle, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. This topic about what's going on with men and how, whether it's educationally, things with the family, things with the working world, how things are affecting men and the broader implications for the rest of society has been discussed for a little while now. And this book has become one of the more prominent works and has really made its way around. And I thought, well, let me take a look at it. This is something I'm very passionate about. I care a lot about men and boys, especially from an education standpoint. This is why I went into the field of education largely. One, I like learning stuff and I like books and all that stuff, so it's fun for me. But one of the reasons I became an educator is because I just saw a need in the culture that too many boys were growing up without fathers. Too many kids were going to school where there was no male teachers. And I thought, well, I'm good at school. I like, academic stuff. And I'd like to help these kids. And maybe I could be a positive role model for them. And so that's one of the big reasons I went into the field of education. I've been doing it for 25 years. When I was a kid, I had male teachers in both fifth and sixth grade, and then through middle school and high school. 5 years later, by the time my brother came along at my elementary school, there were no more men in the building. I think the principal was still a man. I think he had the same principal that I did when I was there. But other than that, he didn't have any male teachers in his entire elementary schooling. So I saw this when I was a kid. And then when I became a teacher myself, I worked at a school where I was the only male person in the whole building except for the PE teacher. And he was like 60 something. And so he had been doing this forever. He wasn't in a real classroom. He wasn't teaching history and science and math and all this stuff. And so the principal, vice principal, every teacher in the academic part of the building was a female. And so I was like, okay, I'm in the right place. I need to, I'm trying to help these kids have a positive male academic role model in their life. And then, I was also a coach. And so, I could teach them about English and history and all that stuff. But then I could also teach them about sports and I could be active with them. And I used to go out to recess and throw the football with them and, teach them things out there too. And so my passion for helping young people in general, but especially helping boys, has always been there, and it's guided my entire professional life. I've just felt like there are too many young men who don't care enough about being a cultured, civilized, educated gentleman who is still also a man. And you can be manly, but you can also be smart and cultured. You can like a lot of different things, and that's what I wanted to bring to students. And so any author or speaker who talks about how we can help boys better and young men, I'm all ears. And so I really wanted to like this book, and so I was happy to pick it up. And unfortunately, there were a lot of things that were not great about this book, and so it's sort of weird. He's gotten tons of positive acclaim, and even on the back of the book, there's a lot of authors that I really respect, and I've read their books who give these very kind blurbs. Christina Hoff Sommers, I've read her work. Obviously, Jonathan Haidt, I've read his. Arthur Brooks, I've read his work. And all these people are on the back of this book saying what a great book this is. And then I read it, and I was like, did you actually read this book? There are so many problems in here that Reeves kind of gets away with that no one's challenging him on. So I'm going to do that here. Again, I really wanted to like this book. I've done other kind of big concept book reviews in other podcasts. I did one a long time ago on Michael Sandel's book on meritocracy, and I really destroyed his ideas there. He got so many things wrong in that book. But I also knew where he was coming from, and I knew I was going to dislike it, and I was going to have a lot of arguments to make against it. Same thing with Salman Khan's book about AI and education. I had a feeling this wasn't going to be something I would agree with, and sure enough, I was right. But this, I thought, well, this is about a topic I've devoted my life to. I'm going to agree with a lot of this stuff in here. And yet the way he presents his information and some of the arguments he makes they just don't work. They're not the best arguments you could make if you're going to take this topic seriously. And so I'm going to dive into some of these. I've read this book almost 3 times now, okay? When I got it, I read it once through. And then as I was reading, I noticed a lot of problems, and so I read it again and took a bunch of notes as I was reading for the second time. And then, because what I was going to do is I was going to give a episode breakdown, chapter by chapter. Each one was going to be its own podcast because there's so many problems in this book. It's like I need to devote an entire episode to each chapter, and then because I'm super cheap and I get books from the library, this is a library book. I got a note saying your book will not be renewed; it's due back this week. And so I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to have time to do every single chapter, so I'm going to give kind of an overview here in just one episode, and I'll try to cover as much as I can, but I'm going to have to stay a little bit on the surface, but I will give some examples on specific flaws of Reeves' arguments. One thing that if you see Richard Reeves on YouTube or you read his Substack, he mentions how Barack Obama has endorsed his book and that he had it on some reading list. And so that's another way this book has really gained traction is prominent people like Obama have said this is a really valuable book. We need to really change the conversation about boys and men in the culture. And every time I see it, I think, first of all, there's no way Obama read your book. He doesn't care about this topic. He does things to just sort of appear to be on the leading edge of these interesting ideas. He's not serious about them. So I don't believe for a second that he actually read this book. But it also goes to something bigger, which happens a lot because Obama does it. And I think Richard Reeves is doing it here, which is taking ideas that have been around a while, especially from people on the other side of the political spectrum, and then finally realizing, oh, those ideas were actually pretty valid. And then his side of the political spectrum writes about it and gets all this acclaim for it, thinking that his ideas are brand new or that he's the one leading the conversation on these tough topics. And it's like, yeah, some of us on the other side have been saying this for a while. We said, hey, some of the things you guys are doing in the culture, it's not going to be good for boys and men. You might want to ease off on some of those policies. You might want to ease off on some of the rhetoric. All the things that have been going on in the culture the last, especially decade, but even further back than that, 30 years really. Like some of us were going, yeah, this isn't going to be good. There's going to be some serious catastrophic consequences if you keep treating boys and men this way. So you might want to be careful. And then sure enough, we turn out to be right. And then people on the other side come along and you go, boy, you know what? There's a lot of problems with boys and men. Maybe we should start talking about this. Whereas those of us who tried to have this conversation a while ago were shouted down as, oh, you're part of the patriarchy. If you care about boys and men, you must be part of the patriarchy. You're a sexist. This is all misogyny. If you're not supporting women, you must be a sexist. It's like, no, that's not it. It's just that if you're going to treat men this way, if you're going to put policies in the culture, either academically or in the labor force, that affect men this way, there are going to be consequences. And that's what he really spends most of the book talking about. And so it's very heavily researched. He's a think tank guy, and so that's his thing, is to do a lot of research. And so that's, I think, why people are jumping on board, is he has a lot of data and he has a lot of citations. And so it looks very, official, like everything is so scientifically proven. And a lot of it is, like, I'm not doubting his data, but the way he organizes it and the arguments he draws from it are really incomplete. And so this is a very frustrating book. Again, I've read it 2.5 to 3 times, trying to more fully understand what he thinks he's saying. And then just noticing for myself all the things he's avoiding. And so I'm going to just cover a few of those today. But a couple big things that you notice when you read Of Boys and Men by Richard Reeves is you can tell he's desperate to hold on to his liberal card. All right. I don't care what side of the aisle people are on. And that's the position he kind of pretends to come from, where he's imagining himself as being very neutral and even-handed. And there are parts of the book where he actually does do that, and I'll get to some of those. But you can still tell through many of his arguments, like, he refuses to bend on certain things that have been kind of disastrous. And he'll give a whole slew of data on, again, how things that have happened with women in the last couple decades have really affected men poorly. And he'll immediately say, but that doesn't mean those were bad. Those were great advancements for women. It's like, well, were they? I don't know if they were. If they caused all these downstream catastrophic consequences, I don't think we can just, in a blanket way, say, well, these were good for women. Like, maybe, but also maybe not. I think you're putting that in there so that you get to appear to women who might be critical of you writing a whole book about boys and men, that no, you're still on their side. You still support all the things that have been going on recently, even though they've had horrible consequences. Or at least some of them have had terrible consequences. So You can just track throughout the whole thing. And I didn't even know anything about him. I don't know his politics, or I didn't know his politics. To me, he's just an economist, a guy who does research. So I didn't know it. I didn't have any preconceived notions about it. But as I read, I was like, oh, I can tell what side of this political spectrum you're on. And sure enough, when I would go look it up, I could tell. I was confirmed from my instincts of reading. I could tell, oh, he's on that side, because the way he's presenting this argument, he's desperate to still look good to the pro-feminist crowd, even though he's going to admit through a lot of the data that some of those ideas have not been great, or they've had consequences that they didn't predict, which some of us did. Along that line, you can tell he's obsessed with the word equality. Everything has to be about equality. Again, regardless of consequences. And that's what someone in a think tank, or that's what someone in politics, or anybody who advises people in these policies, that's kind of what you get away with, is you can just have a high-minded idea about equality and go, well, it doesn't matter if it causes all these massive problems. As long as things appear to be equal, then it must be a good thing. It's like, well, no, there's always trade-offs. Like, one of the first rules of economics is there's always trade-offs. You can promote that, okay, but what are the consequences? What are you giving up if you're going to implement that policy? Or if you're going to implement that policy, what are you now adding as an additional problem? Maybe the solution you've offered solves that problem, but it causes three more. Was that good to do? Well, you didn't think about that because all you cared about was equality. So he's a big guy on data. He has lots of statistics and percentages and all this stuff. And you can tell he's a guy who just looks at people as data points. He's not thinking of people as individuals who make choices, and that those choices have consequences for them and for the culture around them. It's just, well, do these numbers match up or not? If not, then it must be something unfair, and we need to do something about it to make it equal. And again, I wish he'd take a more Austrian economics perspective, which is, well, you might want to be careful of that, because these are individuals we're dealing with, and you can't just treat people as data points that you can just manipulate on a graph and go, well, if we just do this and we just do that, then everything will turn out to be more equal. And in all of our efforts to make things more equal, one of the things that he does acknowledge is, well, actually things are a lot more unequal. It's just in the other direction now. In your desperate attempt to make things more equal, you actually made things just as bad going the other way. So the way things were, in the 60s or 70s, that's all been fixed. Except now the problem still exists, just going in the other direction. And so we're still not at equality, but that's still what he wants to push, is how do we get things to be more equal? It's like, yeah, do you realize every single policy you're implementing just causes the culture to tilt back and forth, because people are still going to make their own choices, and I'll get to some of those choices as we go. Part of this obsession with equality that he has is he constantly talks about how the initiatives we could put forth to help boys and men don't have to be part of a zero-sum game, where we don't have to, in a way, to help men sort of catch up or help boys catch up. That doesn't mean we have to harm women. And we can still advocate for all of the things we've been doing for women over the last several decades, educationally, workforce stuff, all that. And we can also do that for men. It's like, okay, perhaps. However, it's also been your side that did the opposite of that advocated for all these advantages for women. And what that did was, oh, by the way, it's going to hurt men to do that. And that happens. It happens racially. It happens whenever you're looking at demographics, this is what you do. So now all of a sudden you're going, well, it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game, because apparently it was okay to harm men 40 years ago, as long as the women got ahead. But now, if you wanted to create more equality, well, we can't do anything to those women because they've made all these strides. We just need to help men. And again, that might work in the theoretical. But in the real world, that's not exactly how things always go. And he doesn't really think about that. These policy guys, they're not part of the real world. They live in the world of abstract theories and data. And, which I'll mention again later when it gets to schooling stuff or business stuff. Like he, as far as when I was looking into his bio, he's never been in education. He's not an educator. I've been a teacher for 25 years. I know education. I know boys in education. Like some of the things he says come from no foundation of education at all. It's just, well, what do the numbers say? Let's look at the graph. Well, that's not how boys or any students operate. he's also not a business person. And so like these ideas you have real world consequences, and some of those are zero sum consequences. For example, okay, if you're going to say, well, helping one group doesn't mean we have to harm another group. Okay, so let's say, in the past, there was a company. Let's say I run an engineering firm, all right? And so I've got all these really smart math and physics types of people. And in my company, I've had 6 men and 1 woman working for me. It's tilted that way. Maybe I'm a big sexist and I've only wanted to hire men, or maybe that's just how it worked out because more men like engineering than women. Who knows? But for whatever reason, I have 6 men and 1 woman as employees. And let's say my company is now doing so well that I have in my budget the opportunity to hire another person. I'm going to bring on another engineer. My company's growing. That's great. I can hire a new person. Okay. And then someone with a policy comes along and says, well, we care about equality. So therefore, since you only have 1 woman working at a company against 6 guys, your next hire should be a female. And so now I hire that female. You might think, well, this is good. I'm moving towards making things more equal. Excellent. Great. Except that was a zero-sum situation. When some policy person comes in and says, you need to hire that type of person, well, in the real business world, sometimes those are zero-sum games because if I hired that person, I couldn't hire this person. Okay, I only have budget for one employee. So hiring one means not hiring the other. That is a zero-sum game. One person wins, the other person loses. One person gets a job, the other person doesn't have a job. That's a zero-sum situation. So when he says, and so if you were to flip this and try to help guys in some way and go, well, it doesn't mean we have to hurt women. Well, if you were to flip the situation, it would, because now if the roles were reversed in my engineering firm scenario, well, that would be a woman who now couldn't get hired because we made such an emphasis on hiring that guy to make things more equal. Now, was that the right thing to do? Maybe. I don't know. Was it the right thing to do if that one gender was definitely a better employee? Well, of course it was. Yeah, you should hire the best person. But again, he's all about equality and helping everyone and making sure it's not a zero-sum game. But situations like this in the real business world, these are zero-sum games. When you're dealing with jobs or money or something with production, like, yeah, the resources you devote to one place, you can't devote to another place. Okay? They're not the same. So one gain equals one loss. That's how it is in budgeting. That's like the definition of budgeting. What you spend here can't be spent there. So when he says this isn't a zero-sum game, everyone can advance and everyone can have equality, apparently at any cost, because I'll give an example in a little bit about here's how this works in reality. Who's going to pay the cost of this? Well, he doesn't, because he's not in the business world. He's not a teacher. He's not in the education world. He doesn't actually have to live these out when he has these ideas. So it doesn't matter to him. His whole goal is, how do I get the numbers to work? It doesn't matter the people involved or the costs involved. So we have a whole book that is rooted in data, but then how you use that data, it really falls apart. And I'm not saying every idea he has is bad, but it's clear that he doesn't fully understand these topics. And so I'm going to give a few examples of those. So one thing he really does here is he does have a section on biology, and that's good. And he gets a lot of stuff right. But one thing he really ignores is how women decide who they're going to be with. Because he talks in the book a lot about the breakdown of family, how that affects education, how family and labor are related. And that's all fine, except he never gets to the fundamental part, the lowest level upon which all of that is constructed, which is, how do women decide whom to marry? Because if you're going to have educated kids and you have a stable household and all that stuff, well, it usually needs to start with marriage. Well, how do people decide to get married? And he ignores a major, major fact. Not almost everybody, but the great majority of women tend to want to marry men who make more money than they do. All right? The data, I was reading an article recently that said, what was it? It said, for situations where the woman has more education than the man. Okay, so let's say a woman is a college graduate and the man only graduated high school. Or the woman has a master's degree, but the man only has a bachelor's degree. All right, so even if they're both educated, if the woman is higher, they are 93% more likely to want to marry a man who makes more money than they do. So the women kind of do the calculation that, well, if you're not as educated as me, you can make up for it by making more money than me. And so like that's how they find the balance. And I think it was 93% of women feel that way. So we have a situation, as he talks about in the book, where men are becoming less educated today. And he gives all the data that's been available for a long time that boys' reading scores are down. Boys drop out at higher rates than girls do. They don't go to college as much as girls do. Females are now getting masters and PhDs at higher rates than men. So from an education standpoint, that piece of data I just gave is really key. All right, we've developed a culture where women are much more educated than men. Okay, well, what happens with that? Well, at least when you ask them, they say, well, if I'm going to be more educated than my future husband, he better make more money than I do. Okay, so they're even willing to bend on, well, you don't have to go to college. You can be a tradesman, you can do some other career that didn't require college, but you need to be pretty darn successful because I have a master's degree and I'm making 100 grand. So if you didn't go to college or you don't have as high a college education as I have, you better be making 120 grand for me to want to be with you. So that's what men are up against. Okay. Now, what's interesting is when the education levels are a little more similar, or men might have a slightly higher education level, the number declines a bit. So if the man, for example, has a master's degree and the woman has a bachelor's degree, that number only goes down to around 25%. Women are 25% more likely to want to marry a man who makes more than them. So sort of interesting data there that they're okay with someone being more educated, and they're also okay with them sometimes not even making more money. The education part kind of is their value statement. Like they can say, well, my husband doesn't make a lot of money, but he's very educated. And many women are okay with that. In fact, perhaps 75% of women are okay with that. But that 25% is still a large number. So whether it's 93% where women are more educated, they demand that men make more than them, or even if it is a little bit more egalitarian where the women are not quite so strict about that, still 25% of them want a man to make more money than them. So that's what we're left with, that Richard Reeves never ever mentions, that here's what women are searching for. And I don't like that. I didn't marry a woman who thinks that way. Thankfully, I married an amazing person who doesn't think like these other women do. We fell in the category of the latter one. So I have more education than my wife does, but she makes a lot more money. I'm a teacher. I don't make hardly anything. So, she works in the business world, and so she's always made more money than me, or at least most of our marriage. And so that's where we fall into. But she didn't have that requirement that I make more money. She doesn't care how much money I make. She just wants me to help people and to be good at something, and therefore we both contribute to whatever our household income is. She didn't marry me for money, but many women do. And so if you're just going to ignore, again, I don't know what that is. If it's nature, I think part of it, nature plays a role, that just biologically women sort of have a greater sense of needing protection amid, in our modern case, economic circumstances. So, if they're going to stay alive and if they have children, take care of children, well, they need more money. And so they need to ensure that someone has a lot of money. And if they can't get it, they need to make sure their spouse does. And so that's what they're thinking about. Whether it's biologically, and that's just still so deeply in us, or if it's just social, that women just have been trained to like guys with more money. I don't know what it is, but that is something that Reeves completely ignores. If you're going to talk about economics of gender and labor and family dynamics, you better talk about the fact that that's what women expect, or at least many do. Again, thankfully, there's many women like my wife who don't care about that, but there are many who do. They will not even think of marrying you unless you make more money than them. All right? I know women like that, and that's fine. That's their choice, and the men are fine with it too. But that's a reality you have to face. And so if we're going to keep encouraging women to go into these higher level professions and get further educated and all that stuff, great. That's fine. That's the encouragement that he talks about, and I support that to a certain degree. But that's not going to eliminate the fact that they're going to expect men to be even higher than them. So it's not just as much as you want it to be equal, even among the women themselves, they don't really want it to be equal. That's the great irony. And so what this actually leads to, that again, he doesn't mention, but this is the weird utopia that many women seem to live in, is that women want to have high education and make a lot of money. They want to have good jobs and have a high income. Okay, fair enough. We all do. But they also want their men to have really good jobs and make even more money. At least many of them do. But then they also want the choice that if they don't want to work, they also get to keep all that money. So again, like that's the fantasy world that many women live in. All right. They themselves want to go make a bunch of money because they want to be the independent, businesswoman moneymaker. Okay, great. Go do that. But they also demand that men are at least as equal to them. And in many cases, I just said the data proves they want even higher salary. So they want their man to make a lot of money. And then when women aren't in the workforce, then they leave that, if they choose to step aside from that job for a little while to have kids, to try something new for a while, whatever they want to do, they want to keep all of that money that they had from their job. It's like, well, that's asking a lot. That you get everything, you want your spouse to have everything, and even when you don't work for it, you also get everything. Well, there's trade-offs in this world. And if you just appease women's desires to have all three of those things, well, the money's going to run out. There aren't enough people who, especially men, there aren't enough men to satisfy those conditions. And there's also not enough money to satisfy those conditions. And yet that's what women seem to want. And Reeves thinks that's okay. Well, it's like, yeah, that's the zero sum part. If you want all of that, something's got to give. You can't have everything. The resources have to come from somewhere. And, women, you would think, want it from men, but as he gets throughout, as he kind of hints at, but never even dives into really, is, well, who ends up providing it anyway? When the women want it, where do they get it? Well, the government provides it because you just implement these policies and these government programs. So this is what perpetuates this idea that women can live in this fantasy land where they make a bunch of money, their man makes a lot of money, and then even when they're not working, they also make a lot of money. How do you get all of that? Well, someone gives it to you, and that has to come from somewhere. So this is what is very frustrating about this book is he just ignores some basic truths about reality, especially about gender, and how those affect the various forms of economics, whether it's labor, whether it's family, whether it's education. All of those are intertwined, but at the root of all of those is many women, again, not all, thankfully, again, my wife thankfully doesn't think this way, but many do, where they're like, well, yeah, I want to be successful, but I want my husband to be even more successful. Okay, well, good luck with that. So unless you're going to change women's biology or cultural views, social constructed views, this isn't going anywhere. Okay, it doesn't matter how many more men you get to graduate from college. Women are still going to think, since they've graduated from college, well, I still want my man to be more educated. I still want him to make more money. So there's never going to be enough to create this equality that Reeves seems so intent on creating somehow. He also has a chapter on race. So many problems in that chapter. Again, ignoring how individual people make choices in their own life and have to face consequences for those. Completely ignores it. He views everything like people on his side of the political aisle. Views everything structurally, like, oh, it's this big societal thing. It's like, no, it's not. People make choices. And as an economist, it's super frustrating. He never once, not once, mentions Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams. You cannot have a conversation about economics intersecting with race without talking or getting research from Thomas Sowell or Walter Williams, and he doesn't even mention them. So I have no respect for your position on this topic when you don't at least listen to two of the most influential voices on African American history and African American economics. Again, regarding education, labor, family, etc. Because those gentlemen have written about that for many decades, and they lived through it. Those are guys from previous generations. So, they've lived through it. And you don't even mention them. Instead, he brings up a couple quotes from Ta-Nehisi Coates. Like, what? Ta-Nehisi Coates is neither a historian nor an economist. And yet you're using him as data and not Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams in a chapter on the economics of race. So weird. It's so funny as this reminds me, I actually went through this in grad school. I had a paper once that I wrote. We were studying African American literature in that course, a novel, and I wrote a paper on some of the history and economics because my focus was going to be on economics throughout my process, my degree process. So I wrote one, and my professor hated it, of course, because I was like, well, these are the historical facts. This is what was going on. And it went against his own ideology. And so he didn't like it. And he did the same thing. He's like, well, have you read this piece recently by Ta-Nehisi Coates? And I was like, yeah, he's not a historian or an economist. I'm doing things from actual scholars here. And I go, do you, because he was upset that I had the race stuff wrong. And I was using incorrect data or whatever. I was like, the economists that I cite here are African Americans themselves. I said, like, these aren't white people making up stuff about black people or whatever the racial dynamics are. I said, these are respected African American economists, Walter Williams and Thomas Sowell, among others. I was like, do you know who those guys are? And he's like, oh, well, yeah, he didn't know who they were. So like he was going to have an economics and race discussion with me and had no idea who those two gentlemen were. And then was critical of how I used their long-standing research in my work without any context, without any actual economics knowledge. And so I was like, oh, this is the same thing happening here. Like, you're going to talk about that topic and not use Thomas Sowell and Walter Williams as part of your research? You don't have to necessarily agree with them, but you have to at least include them. You can't have a conversation without those guys. They're the best. They're the best authors of the last 60 years on those topics. You can't ignore them. So that chapter in this book is a big problem. He also, again, he views everything structurally. And so there are many instances in this book where he will use phrases like society needs to. All right. This is something I don't even let my freshmen in college get away with. I never let them say society. I always ask them, who is society? Who are you talking about? Like, society is made of people. Which people are you talking about? Or he uses we throughout the whole book. Like, well, who is we? Am I included in this? Because I don't have the power to do any of this stuff. So who is we? And then he also uses many instances of passive voice. And so, passive voice grammatical constructions don't have a subject doing the action. It's left undetermined. And so what's the implication when someone uses their passive voice to try to initiate policies? Well, who's doing that? Who's paying for that? Who's going to face the consequences of that? Where does this come from? Well, you don't say. It's more like, this should be done. Be done is a passive construction. Well, done by whom? Society. Who's society? You never say. Well, I would only guess, and based on some of the other suggestions he has in the book, it's the government. The government should be implementing these programs to create the situations that lead to these equality outcomes that we say we want. We don't know if those are actually good for anybody, but they're equal or they're positive for whichever gender you're choosing to highlight at that time. It's like, yeah, but who does that? Who's going to oversee that? Who's in charge of that? Who has that idea? Who, more importantly, who pays for it? Because this is what these policy folks do: is they have these ideas without any thought about, well, who's going to foot the bill for that? It's not you, obviously. Is it me? Are you going to reach into my pocket, take money out of my pocket so that you can start your program to help that group of people? Well, it's not very nice to me, stealing from me. So who's doing this exactly? I'm part of society. So are you saying I have to do this? Who is we exactly? Well, he never says those things. And so, again, this is something I talk about with my students. Like, you cannot say that. If you want someone to do something, make them the subject of your sentence, and that's who's doing the verb. You can't have a sentence where they say, this should be done, without clarifying who's doing it. He does that throughout the whole book. As an educator, and he values education highly too, I would like to see more men in college, but also I believe in freedom, that people should choose whatever they want to do. So he has a lot of emphasis on, we need to get more men into college. Again, kind of ignoring the fact that, well, if women keep advancing, we're going to be back at the same situation where they're still undereducated and they're still going to get jobs that are lower than what the women have. And so now we're back in the same situation where women don't want to be with those guys. So would that help some? Yeah, of course it would. But it certainly wouldn't solve these problems. Again, especially because women are being so successful educationally now, that we have to approach this problem differently. Education, especially college education, is not the cure-all that he kind of assumes it to be. He does hedge and he says, look, maybe college isn't for everyone, but the implication throughout much of the book is we need to get more men into college, and this will solve many of the problems, because then they'll get better jobs and make more money, and then they will be more appealing to women and they'll have better families and all this stuff. It's like, maybe, unless the women are more educated and are making more money, then this still doesn't work. So you can't view college as the big cure-all. it also, there's a gender problem here. Okay. Again, since he's not an educator, he doesn't know this, but I do. Um, you know, he's trying to make things more equal in college. And right now, the tilt of female to males in college enrollment is very high. There's a lot of women and an increasingly lower number of men. And he says that's not good. Now, he gives some information about why that's not good, and maybe that's true. I would assume that, yeah, at a certain point, if the number gets too high, yeah, it's probably bad for everybody. But I think a bit of a gender imbalance on the female side is actually kind of beneficial. And then again, anyone who's been in education sort of knows this, even if they don't consciously think about it. Here's an example, okay? I'm not saying my anecdote here is across the board true everywhere. I'm just telling you what I've experienced. So I went to a college that was very heavy female. It was at least 60-40, maybe more than that, heavily tilted that way. And it was great. I never noticed any problems. I never thought that it was that men didn't have a place there, that the school favored women or something like that. I went to a Christian college, and that's how most Christian colleges are. And actually, most colleges in general are now tilting toward that. They're becoming more like Christian colleges, which is very, again, heavily tilted percentage wise on the female side. And so, yeah, 60-40, 65-35, whatever it was when I was in school, it was fine. Our school was great. We got along with a lot of different types of people. And, I enjoyed my college experience, as many people at those types of, especially religious colleges, tend to do. However, when I was at one of the schools I taught at was also a Christian college, and it was tilted in the opposite direction. The only Christian college I can think of in the whole country, because I've researched this, I never found another Christian college in the country that was tilted this way, where it was basically the exact opposite for men. It was like 65-35 men. Okay. So I went to a Christian college, every other Christian college in the country, heavy tilting towards higher percentage of females. This school I taught at, higher percentage of males by a lot. Was there a difference? After all, they're both Christian colleges. So, there's supposedly good people there, and, it's college, so they should care about academics and all that stuff. The differences in the environment was like night and day. Okay. My Christian college, heavy female percentage, great. School I taught at, disaster. Academically, socially, a disaster. Okay. Now, not in everything. There were good parts and there were good students. But generally speaking, our school had one of the lowest graduation rates in the country, because the men, we brought them onto college campus to try to balance things out, and the men didn't care. They didn't care about schooling, and so they quit and they left. And also, not only academically was it a problem, socially it was a problem. Lots of behavior problems. Why? Because you've got a ton of 19-year-old dudes running around a campus who don't care about school. That's what you get. So when you have that many, when you try to now encourage men to go back to school, look, I'm all for that. I want men to be educated. But there is a number, I don't know what it is, but if you're aiming at equality, 50-50, one, I don't think that's ever going to be that way. But two, the problems don't emerge at 50-50. I think the problems emerge earlier than that. Okay. There is a certain tipping point where if you have a lot of men on campus, and again, ours was tilted past 50-50, but it might even be a number approaching 50-50, where if you just have too many dudes, it actually causes a lot of problems. Behaviorally, men at 19, 20 years old, they cause problems. They just do. And so I would be very hesitant about trying to implement policies that get more men on your college campus. I actually tried to encourage my school to reduce the number of men. Okay, consistently it was like, we have too many dudes here. It's causing all these problems and it's harming our academics. We need more females on this campus. It'll help. It'll help the social structure. It'll make the academics stronger. We need more females. And they're like, nope, we got to go get men, because it was about sports and it was just easy to get men, engaged in athletics. And so they're like, the way to grow our school is to have more sports, and that means get more men. And so that's what we did, and it ruined everything. So I've seen it from both sides. And heavily male in heavy male enrollment can be positive in certain situations. Many like polytechnic kinds of institutes, high engineering schools, those tend to be like that 60-40 or even more male, and they function fine. Why? Because those men are there for their actual education. They're not there to goof around like most college kids. All right. Same thing happens at West Point. Obviously, many, many more males. Um, and why does that work? Because they're aiming at something higher there than just the normal college kid stuff. They're aiming at service of the country, obviously military service. They have different goals, just like the engineering guys. They have different goals that are beyond just, I want to hang out with my buddies and play on the baseball team or whatever. I mean, like, they're aiming at something higher. So those situations they can work fine. But if you're not a school that is you're aiming to get more men, and the men coming there don't have a very specific and higher purpose than even the basic education you're offering, you're running some big risks there. It's going to cause a lot of problems because I've seen it. So when he talks about adding more men to college, like, okay, yeah, but at a certain point, there's gonna be consequences to that, just like there's consequences to all these policies he's trying to implement. Here's a specific example. Let me pull up a specific page where he kind of falls into that trap of saying that here's an idea, and if we just implement it, everything will work out fine, without ever specifying how exactly you do this. On page 173, in part of his solution section, which I'll get to solutions here in one moment, he talks about how fathers and mothers both should be legally entitled to 6 months of paid leave for each child. He says, ideally, this leave would offer 100% wage replacement up to median earnings, paid for by higher Social Security contributions from employers and employees. Oh, okay. So higher contributions. So it's a tax. You're taxing all of us now, so that men can stay home and not work. Okay. His goal in this paid leave idea is a noble one. He wants a stronger family unit. And so he's saying, look, men should be able to have to take time away from work and be at home to help raise the kid instead of just having the mom do it all the time. And, we've implemented maternity leave. Well, we should have equal leave for men too. It's like, okay, but how much does this cost? Well, you've already said you're going to have to increase contributions from both the employer and the employee. So this is, again, another policy where you go, oh, well, just raise the cost. Yeah, have more people contribute. Well, where does that money come from exactly? Like, it doesn't just appear out of thin air. Someone has to pay for this. And so if the business pays for it, well, get ready to have all those costs passed on to their consumers, or it's going to cost in other ways where now they don't have as much money to hire more employees. It's like, well, I think a guy would probably rather have a job in the first place than paid leave. Like, the job matters more than the paid leave. So if now your company is spending so much on paid leave, then maybe they're going to cut workers. Well, now you've harmed the guys even more. So again, this is like the fantasy world where you can just have ideas and they don't have to pertain to the reality of how a business functions. So that's just one simple example. And again, you notice the language. Fathers and mothers should be legally entitled. Be entitled. That's passive voice. Entitled by whom? Legally, I guess you mean the government. The government should pass a law that forces employers to provide this. Is that what you're saying? Like, how about you just say that so we know exactly what you mean? But he probably doesn't want to say that because that everyone would go, wait a minute, another law? And so now what? If someone doesn't abide by it, they're in trouble. What if I can't afford to abide by it? How do I run my business? Well, you get around those details by putting things in passive voice so that people don't notice. Well, who actually is doing this? Yeah, that's the passive voice. Again, throughout the whole book, in the race section, the single motherhood section, all this stuff, he really ignores like the fundamental facts of how you avoid poverty. He's saying, look, we want to help these families, help kids grow up better, have men do better. He never even discusses like the key factors for avoiding poverty. There's like 4 of them. It's very simple. Other people have talked about this. It's finish high school. Do not be a high school dropout. Finish high school. That's one. As long as you can do that, you're on the path to never being truly poor. That's good. Second, get married. Now, not everyone gets married, and so if you can't, you can't find a person who likes you or it just never works out for you, that's fine. But if you can, try to get married. All right? Third, do not have children unless you are married. Being a single parent is terrible for your finances, okay? It's very difficult, and it puts strain on everyone else around you, meaning your community, because other people have to pay for you now. So do not have children unless you are married. And another one, try to stay married. That's key. Don't get divorced. And then don't commit crimes. If you go to jail for a crime, by the time you come out, it's very difficult to work your way back up the economic ladder. So it's very simple. Finish high school. If you want to go to college, great, but at least finish school so you have a credential. All right. That'll help you get at least some basic employment and you can start earning money. Do not have children out of wedlock. Don't go around getting girls pregnant. If you're a girl, don't sleep with dudes who can get you pregnant until you're married. Then, when you want to start a family, make sure you're married when you're doing it. And then last, don't be a jerk. Don't commit crimes. Do those four. And like, these are the most basic things ever. They're so simple. Anybody can graduate high school. Anybody can wait to not get people pregnant. Not anyone can get married, but if you can, you should do that. And then lastly, anybody can not commit crimes. Like, it's not hard to not steal cars. Okay? It's not hard to not go hold up a store at gunpoint. It's easy. Don't do those things. All right? If you do those four things, you can avoid poverty. That's what you have, like a 90% chance of never being poor. That's all it takes. And yet, these authors and these think tank people, they just like jump through these, politicians too, jump through these mental gymnastics to like avoid the basic facts of reality and never put the responsibility on the people taking those actions. Like, well, I'm poor. Life is difficult. Well, why did you get those girls pregnant? Because now you got to pay for them and now you're not married and that's difficult. Or why did you get pregnant? Like, why did you drop out of high school? Why did you go steal a car? Like, yeah, look at people's choices. Look at how they behave and see what the consequences are. Many of them lead to poverty or just less than ideal family situations or employment situations. So if you're not going to acknowledge the basics of life, it doesn't matter how many hoops you jump through and policies you try to implement and how many new taxes you put onto people and how the way you try to manipulate the social environment. It doesn't matter. There are a few basic truths. Do those and you'll probably be fine. But he never even mentions them. Sad. He also has a big straw man. He has a few of these, but the biggest one really comes on 118. He has two chapters that are pretty decent actually, where he criticizes both people on the left and the right, and he says, "Look, you people on the left have been looking at this wrong." And he says, "People on the right, you've been looking at it wrong." He thinks he has the right way of doing it. His way is still on the left side, but I respect the fact that he's trying to talk to both sides. But he says this. He says conservatives see the solution to men's problems as lying in the past rather than the future, in the form of a restoration of traditional economic relations between male providers and female carers. Okay, so this is someone who never talks to conservatives, all right? This is someone who lives in a bubble and doesn't know anything about conservative people. As a conservative, libertarian conservative, trust me, I've never met, or I don't have anybody in my circle of fellow conservatives, friends, family, people in my community. I've never talked to anybody who says, what would be better is if we went back to the 1950s and women stayed home and had no career opportunities and men did all the work outside the home and that was how they organized their families. We should go back to the 1950s. I've never, ever once in my 46 years of being in this world, I've never heard someone actually say that. My parents didn't live that. My grandparents didn't live that. And my wife and I don't live that. Like, I don't know who anyone is that says we should go back to the 50s. Now, if people want to actually live that out and the couple, when they decide to get married, say, they determine together that, well, we think that the woman should stay home and take care of the kids and the man should go out and be the breadwinner. And that's how this family is going to be run. If they want to do that, that's totally fine. That's their choice and good for them. But I've never heard anyone say, this is how everyone should be and we should go back to the 50s. So, like, this is a total straw man. You're building up this conservative position that doesn't actually exist. Do many conservatives actually sort of live that way with this very distinct division of labor from a household perspective? Yeah. I'm assuming some liberals live that way too. But no one's ever said everyone should do that. And no one's definitely ever said, let's go back to the way things were when we didn't let women in the workforce. Like, no one's ever said that. What are you talking about? So he has some straw men in this book that provide, as straw men do, an easy way for him to form his own argument. But it's like, yeah, you're not even holding up the other side's argument very well. So it actually makes your position look weaker too. He also never mentions how welfare has affected families. He briefly mentions welfare in a variety of parts of the book, but he says, one British politician and scholar, David Willits, writes in his book, The Pinch, a welfare system that was originally designed to compensate men for loss of earnings is slowly and messily redesigned to compensate women for the loss of men. Reeves adds, a more positive way to make the same point is that governments increasingly see their role as supporting women raising children, in part so that they are not trapped in a dependent relationship with a man. Okay, so what the guy said, the other guy, David Willits, says is exactly correct. In the old way of doing things, I always think of the movie Cinderella Man, where when Jim Braddock loses his job and he's lost all his money because it's the Great Depression, he has to go to the relief office. That was kind of the welfare of the time. And since he was the sole earner in his household, because they had 3 kids and his wife stayed home, he went there and got relief money so that he could support his family. Okay. Well, that all changed once some social conditions started changing and the government expanded their welfare policies to now go to everybody. So in the 1960s, we see this dramatic shift in the family structure. Why is that? Up until the 1960s, black families were stable. In fact, many times more stable than white families. Black families had fewer children out of wedlock, sometimes even than white families. Well, all of that changed dramatically in the 60s. Why? Is because the government started handing out money to women to not be married. So what's the incentive now for women to maintain the family structure, or for men to maintain the family structure? But it's especially women because they're the ones getting the money. Why would they maintain the family structure when if they get married, they lose their government income? Yes, ideally they would gain a husband's income, but if for whatever reason it wasn't working out, it's a much easier choice for them to go, let's just break up. I don't want to be with you. In fact, I might get more money by going on welfare than having you as a provider in the household. So yeah, that's what happened. And he never mentions that. Like, he just assumes that these changes to men in education and then in labor and then in the family were just sort of based on the increasing success of women, that women got more educated, women got better jobs. And that really changed the dynamics of male-female relationships that led to family problems, without ever acknowledging, hey, do you think that when the government starts handing money to women to have children but not be married, that can have a big effect on how families are structured? And then it has effect on future boys growing up in households without men? Don't you think that's kind of a big deal? Well, he never even talks about that. The thing that he discusses throughout the whole book is that, women advanced and broke away from this idea of being economically dependent on women or on men. And again, for much of history, that was probably true, where people refused to hire women, let's say, or people refused to let women into a college, or whatever the kind of discriminatory policies were. Yeah, that was a reality. And so there was this sense of economic dependence, that if a woman was going to actually have a life and be able to want to have a family someday, well, what were her choices? Either live at home with her mom and dad, or have to get married to a man who had to provide for her. And so there wasn't this, as often anyway, these opportunities for women to go and explore and be on their own and have their own homes and have their own jobs and make their own money and yada yada. Again, doesn't mean women didn't do that. Of course, some women did. But yeah, structurally in our society, that was generally the case. And so, as he says throughout the book, women used to be economically dependent on men. And so now the government coming in and handing women a check each month, well, is now helping them not be economically dependent on men too. It's like, well, is that a good thing though? Like, do we want to encourage women to not be in a family structure? Because as the rest of the book talks about, that causes lots of problems. So like, are you advocating we should reduce the welfare payments? Because that might help, actually. It might force men and women to have to work together to raise their family. But he wouldn't want to do that, of course, because that's on his side of the aisle, that these big government programs, they view it as like rescuing women from economic dependence. Whereas before it was like, yeah, you were dependent, but you also then had opportunity to have a family, and, someone provided for you. And for many people, that was a pretty good way to live, actually. So now we have women who are, yeah, you're not economically dependent anymore, but now you're single and caring for kids, and now everyone's poor. It's like, why was that a better choice? So he kind of, again, completely bypasses the notion of the government's role in exacerbating this problem of giving people money for having broken homes. I mean, that's just, there was an incentive there, and people have used it. Part of this idea of dependence is very interesting because later in the book he talks about how men seem to be emotionally dependent on their wives, and lots of data. Again, this is found elsewhere too, and it's important that men who are single tend to have more. They get in trouble more often. They can fall into depressive symptoms. When there's a divorce, men tend to take it harder. When there's a death, men tend to take it harder. When their wife passes away. Men have fewer in their social circle. They have fewer friends. So when something bad happens in their life, if they're on their own, they have a hard time reaching out to people. They die younger. Like all sorts of things happen when men aren't supported by women. So it's very weird that he spends a lot of time talking about how women throughout history have been economically dependent on men, and that was a bad thing. But he also acknowledges that, well, men are emotionally dependent on women. And he doesn't necessarily say that's a bad thing. We kind of acknowledge, well, that's probably a good thing. Like, men need that human contact, that human support, and they benefit from being around a female perspective and female love and all that stuff. And yet there needed to be a solution to the economic dependence. But there's no solution offered for emotional dependence. Why? Because it's normal. That's part of life. And so this idea of dependence, I'm not saying things weren't unfair in the past. Yes, they certainly were. But real relationships, men and women, marriage relationships, they're both dependent on each other. That's what a real marriage is. It's not about a man being the breadwinner and holding it over his wife like, haha, you're dependent on me because I make all the money. That's not how it is. It's, again, at least for modern, mature men and women, like when we go into marriage, we go, hey, you know what? I'm going to have some struggles sometimes. And you know what? You're going to have some struggles sometimes. So we can depend on each other. Sometimes I might need to economically depend on you. Sometimes you might need to emotionally depend on me, and vice versa. But we are going to depend on each other because that's what two people who love each other do. And that's what people who get married, that's what they're choosing for their future. Like, that's normal. And yet we talk about dependence as a bad thing. And again, it's not like we want people dependent, like you're held hostage or something, that you can't go work because the man has to do it. That's not it. Even in people with very equal households, like my wife and I have, like, we know we're dependent on each other. That's part of what we've signed up for. And part of what makes marriage great, and what I always encourage when I talk to college kids is like, yeah, if you don't want to get married, don't. It's your choice. But just be aware that it's much easier to advance in life when two people work together than doing everything by yourself. You can do it, single people can be very successful. That's fine. But I found, my own family history has been this way, where it's like, well, good thing there were two of you working on this because, you had some tough times and it was better for you to be together than be by yourself. And so that's been the same thing for my wife and me, which is, yeah, when one of us goes through a job change, well, it's a good thing I have the other person to support me. When someone goes through a difficult emotional thing, well, I'm glad we have the other person to support me through this. When you want to pursue a goal, it's easier if two people are working towards that goal than just one person. When you can combine incomes, or you can combine your time usage, or whatever you two figure out together, yeah, you can tend to accomplish a lot more together than you can by yourself. I would never be in the situation I'm in professionally, financially, any way I view myself as successful. I would have never been who I am without her. It's just the reality of it. I'm dependent on her for my success. And I think she'd say the exact same thing about me. That all the things she's pursued and the goals we've achieved and the strides she's made in her business and all that stuff, she wouldn't have, if she would have, it would be way more difficult to do by herself. It's way easier for her to do because I'm here to help her. That's what marriage is. It's about depending on each other. So he constantly, throughout the book, talks about dependence as a bad thing. And yes, many years ago, it was a bad thing. But we need to get past that and acknowledge that, proper marriages where people actually treat each other as equals and as complements to each other, where you go, yeah, I'm good at some things, you're good at some things. So when we combine those things, then we're actually stronger together. My favorite movie, Rocky, right there. One of my favorite lines is Rocky goes, because Paulie's like, why do you even like Adrian? She's kind of weird, she's too quiet. I don't even know if she's very smart. He goes, hey, I got gaps, she's got gaps, together we fill gaps. Yeah, that's what it is. You're dependent on each other, and that's what makes both of you successful. So it's okay to be dependent on the other person as long as they can be dependent on you, and that's fairly equal. Nothing's ever perfect, but like you have to view that equally, and that's what real marriages do. So it's so funny, and that's how most conservative people think. Like, this is actually the most progressive idea, and it comes from conservatives. We conservatives go, you know what? A man and woman should work together to solve their problems so that it's fair for both of them and so that they both increase their happiness. And over time, they increase the love in their household because maybe they start a family or whatever. But over time, they accomplish much bigger goals than they could ever do by themselves. That's what we do. That's what conservatives tend to do. Again, many of them don't don't make it. They fail along the way. But in general, that's our philosophy. And yet you think, oh, you just want to go back to the 50s. No, no. We're the most progressive family units there are because we believe in, yeah, we each perform a role, we each contribute. If those roles need to shift as our jobs change or as the kids get older or whatever it is, we work on that together. That's what a man and woman as spouses do. And like, he just kind of ignores any of that stuff and thinks you conservatives just want to go back to the 50s. No, it's the opposite of that. We actually want things to be more equal from a complementary standpoint so that we can both be successful, so that our household and our children are successful, and that we can take care of other family members, and then we can take care of our community. But all of that starts because the two of us work together, and then we can affect other people. It's harder to do by yourself. Again, you can, but we've always felt, my wife and I, my parents, her parents, everyone, we've always felt, yeah, when you have two people working together, you can do all sorts of cool stuff. And until we get back to that, yeah, we're gonna have all these broken homes and difficulty with how people decide to live their lives from an economic standpoint. Okay, so those are some of the big flaws. Again, those are just a few of the examples that I saw throughout the book. But in the back of the book, he gets to some solutions, and these are interesting ideas, and I commend him for that because too many people write books that they just complain about stuff. And this is something I always tell my students, like, you can't just write an argument paper where you complain. I need to have what's your idea for fixing this? Because we got to have more ideas. And even if it's a bad idea, throw it out. Let's hear it. And so that's what he does. And he says one of his solutions is that we could hold boys back a year in school. Don't let them start school so early. Let girls get started and let boys wait for one extra year. His thinking in that is that boys' brains are a little slower to develop, particularly regarding their behavior in those types of environments. And so if you let them mature a little bit more, they will start to catch up to girls a little bit, and there won't be so many problems, and they'll be on a better path towards their education. It's like, okay, how does that make sense though when boys at any age are going to have various problems? Now, girls do too, but throughout the book, or throughout certain chapters, he highlights that, well, girls always seem to be kind of ahead on these things. What's also confusing is he gives various examples of where girls are 2 years ahead in this. Sometimes girls are like 4 years ahead in this, but his big solution is that girls should only be 1 year ahead. You're not solving the problem. If girls are 4 years ahead on this developmental trait, maybe it's something with academics, whatever it is, letting the boys have 1 year to catch up isn't going to do it. Like, they're still 3 years behind. So even his own data, his examples of the discrepancies between boys and girls, they don't align, and then it doesn't really match with his explanation. I can only think he came up with this 1 year idea because he thought, well, if I go any further than that, no one's ever going to do it. So let's find a compromise and go with 1 year. But again, what's the difference in that 1 year when that kid is going to be 13 eventually anyway? And 13-year-old boys are mostly nightmares. So what's the difference whether he's 13 now or 13 next year? Some teacher's still going to have that 13-year-old kid. It doesn't matter. Are you saying that if the girls in the class are 12 and the boys are 13, then the social environment and the learning environment will be better for the boys and the girls? Well, he never makes that case. Like, he doesn't prove that. I mean, that's the assumption we would have to make, is that if you put a 13-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl in class, then that learning environment would be better. Or a 17-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl, or an 8-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl, whatever level throughout all of schooling. If the boys get that one extra year to develop, and so they're now slightly more mature. Are you saying that that makes for smarter kids and better schools? Well, he doesn't actually prove that. It's just like a hypothesis based on, well, boys develop slower, so we need to give them a year to catch up. Okay, but where's the data that shows that that actually would work? Again, that 13-year-old boy who's a problem in my class, yeah, he's going to be a problem whatever year he ends up in my class because he's going to be 13 for some teacher. So why does it matter? Well, he never explains that. So that's one of his solutions that he offers that I think he thinks is quite clever. He does address the just logistical problem. Like, well, does that mean one year you're going to have all females in school and all boys are sitting at home? Like, why? That seems a little weird. And he's like, well, you would stagger it over a couple years so that there are boys and girls mixing and all that stuff. It's like, I don't see any reason why that would work. I don't understand that point. It also, just from a personal standpoint, like, I didn't need to be held back a year. Like, I was ready to go to school immediately. I was already reading at a high level before I ever went to kindergarten. In kindergarten, I was reading with the fifth grade class. Like, I could read on their level already in kindergarten. So, like, the idea of holding boys back because, well, they develop slower than girls and they aren't ready for school yet. Like, I was totally ready for school. I would have been ready for school at age 3 or 4. I'd already learned stuff. I loved reading. I had a big vocabulary already. I already knew how to use numbers. Like, I had a good memory. I was ready for school. I've always been that way. It's not like I became good at school later. Like, I was ready for school immediately. So what, would you punish me and make me sit at home doing nothing while my peers who are females all get to go to school? Like, that's not fair. So, like, how do you decide which boys should sit at home and which boys get to go to school? Because yeah, this doesn't. I don't know, logistically know how you would do that unless you said every boy has to stay behind. Well, again, that's not fair to guys like me, who I liked school. I was ready for school and I was very successful in school. So why are you punishing me? It's weird. One of his other solutions is to get more men into heal careers. There's been the push recently to get women into STEM careers. Well, he wants to get boys and men into heal careers. And heal is health, education, something else. I don't remember what the A and L stand for. I'm not going to look it up. These fields that are traditionally more occupied by women, like nursing, for example, or teaching. That these have been female-dominated industries. We need to get more men into those fields, much like they did for women. It's like, we don't have enough female engineers. We need to get more women accepted into engineering programs in college and hire them at their companies. Okay, fine. Again, I think that's weird that you're trying to manipulate these quotas for what you think equality might look like instead of just like, yeah, give everyone opportunities and then let them sort themselves out. But whatever. But what's the incentive? What's the incentive for men to go into those professions? Many of those tend to be lower paying. Sometimes it's because the actual physical labor required is not very difficult. Sometimes it's the academic labor required isn't as high as in other fields. So there's all sorts of reasons why, those careers might pay less. There might be those careers that just are more appealing to women, whatever it is. From a teaching standpoint, a lot of women go into teaching because you can be done by 3 o'clock and then they can be home in the late afternoon to be with their kids. And I'm not saying that's right or that men should have been the ones doing that, but that's just the way women have chosen to do that. I chose to do that. I'm a teacher. And so, we all just make choices, but what's the big incentive? How are you going to actually get men to do that? I became a teacher because I'm from a family of teachers. And so I always saw the value of education. My mom started out as a teacher. My dad still is a teacher. My grandparents were teachers. I have aunts who are teachers. Like, I always saw the value of education, but, I didn't need an incentive. I didn't need some government program, or I didn't need some college scholarship to say, if you come to our school and you major in education or nursing or whatever these other fields are, then, you get a bonus. I didn't need that. I wanted to do it because it was appealing to me. And because, as I said at the top, I wanted to help kids, and I value education as one way of doing that. So, kind of just ignores the fact that people make choices. Here's an example of how this like income problem conflicts with some choices people make. theoretically anyway, I could make a lot more money if I went into administration. I don't know why administrators make a lot more money. They don't do anything that's harder than what teachers do. Sometimes they don't even have as high education as teachers, and yet they make more money. So I don't know why that is the way it is. That seems quite unfair. But if I wanted to do that, I would go do that. So why don't I? If it's all about getting men to make more money and go into these careers where they have more opportunities to make more money, well then I should go do that, right? I have no desire to go be in administration. I don't care about that field or that part of education at all. None. I like helping kids. I like doing scholarly work. I don't want to sit at a desk and push paper around. Like, I don't care about that stuff. I care about the education part of teaching, not the administration part of teaching, not the administration part of education. So when we have these ideas, we need to get more people to go do that. There is nothing you could do to incentivize me to go be an administrator. Even though, again, I've worked for administrators where I'm like, I'm way more qualified than you. I have higher degrees than you do. And yet I make way less than you. I don't know why that is, but I'm okay with it, at least as far as my career goes, because I don't want to do that job. So we all make choices. And it's also influenced by the fact that there might be some choices that we do want to do, but we can't do them. Okay. So just as a quick example, if, because in the book, he gives a chart that shows, too often people's interests don't align with what they actually do. And, women's interests in engineering might be here, but their actual, when they go into the working world, they actually don't get jobs as engineers down, as often. So they're down here. So it's the discrepancy between what they thought they were interested in versus what they ended up doing. Like, and so, of course, policy people like him go, well, we need to do something about that. We need to get those people into those industries that they are actually interested in. It's like, yeah, maybe. Again, maybe you're not as interested in as you think. But two, there's another component to that. Are you actually qualified to be in that industry? Okay. So, for example, maybe my whole life as a kid, I was like, I love space travel and NASA is super cool. I love making rockets and, learning about the history of space travel and all this stuff. And I go, so I'm gonna go be an engineer or a physicist at NASA. I love space. I want to be a physicist at NASA. Okay, that does not mean I'm qualified to go be a physicist at NASA. I am not. I'm not nearly smart enough, mathematically, scientifically, any of that stuff, to work at NASA. So it doesn't matter what my interests are. It matters what I can do. Am I smart enough? Am I talented enough to do that? Well, I'm not. So I have to make another choice. So just because you have an interest in something doesn't mean that it's actually going to mirror what you end up doing. So when you say, well, these women, they would like to go into engineering, but then they end up not being engineers. Well, is it possible that maybe their math skills weren't quite high enough or some other whatever academic measurement? And so, okay, yeah, you might be interested, but you didn't cut it. Just like I wouldn't be cut for it either. That's just the way it is. So we have to balance this idea of, well, what are the incentives? If people wanted to do that and they could do that, well, how do we get them into it? Secondly, how do you know people actually even want to do that? Like me, I don't even want to be in administration, even though it makes more money. Or two, even if you want to do something, how do you know that they can do it? Just like I might want to do physics at NASA all I want, as much as possible. Doesn't mean I'm able to do that. So those three things are very complicated. And he just basically says, well, we should get men to go into those fields. Well, are the incentives there? Is the actual interest there? And then are they even academically or cognitively capable of performing those tasks? Because if any of those three aren't there, then your solution doesn't really matter. So how do you figure that out? Well, he never explains that. One thing we could do, I'm not for picking and choosing, especially from a government standpoint, how people are paid. But he does, to his credit, talk about how we need more men in fields like English. It's like, hey, that's my field. That's what this is why I went into this field, is because I see the value of stories and of literature and language and culture, and I'm trying to pass that on to young people too. And he actually recognized the value of that. So I commend him for that. He never goes far enough and says, okay, well, back to the previous question. How do you incentivize that? Well, maybe if you believe in your policy interventions so much and you really want to get men to do this, maybe you should offer a policy that, hey, any male who is going to become an English teacher, maybe you get to go to college for free. Or if you already have graduated college and you want to go into, and you're an English teacher, you want to get hired, your starting salary is $100,000. Any school district in the country that is hiring a new English teacher must be a male and it must start at $100,000. Well, that would definitely get some men interested. And then that would have the hopefully effects that you are hoping for throughout the rest of your book, that kids would find those topics more interesting, which means they want to get good grades, maybe they want to stay in school longer, they want to go to college more, they want to then become teachers themselves or go into the field of the literary arts in some way. Great. Okay, well, where does it start? Start with the incentives. Again, I don't believe in the government forcing that, but that's the logical step. Well, why he doesn't offer that? Why? Because there's some discrimination involved in that. Like, we're going to only pay men that. Well, if you think it's so valuable, that's what you should offer. If we're going to discriminate in other ways in this culture, well, why not do it this way? If you think it's so valuable to have men do these jobs, offer a government policy where men specifically get paid higher for those jobs. Women won't like it, but then you can make your argument, well, it's best for the culture, it's best for families, it's best for the labor market if this is how it goes. Well, make that case, but he never quite pushes his argument to the logical conclusion. Like, get to that point and then we can maybe have a serious discussion. Because again, I'm already for this. I mean, I'd like to make more money as an English teacher for sure. You know, as a male, like, hey, I'm your key person here. I'm your key demographic. Hire me. Pay me $100,000. That would interest me a lot. But we already can do this, and many school districts already do, where we already pay more, not necessarily based on gender, but based on the field you go into. So, you know, sometimes science teachers are paid more than English teachers because we need more science teachers, and sometimes depending on the school and the background, like sometimes teaching science is actually technically harder, and you might need different qualifications or whatever. And so we do pay those teachers more. I'm all for paying special ed teachers more. Their job is incredibly difficult. I would not want to be a special ed teacher. I don't have the patience and the heart for it. Those people are, you know, those who do a good job of it are saints. I mean, they deserve to be paid the most out of any teacher in any school, special ed teachers, as long as they're doing a good job. So, like, we already pick certain fields that we recognize as being especially challenging, and we can pay those people more. Now just take it a step further, and if you believe that the gender here matters, that's what the whole book is about, that, well, we kind of need men to do more of these things, include that. Say, not only are we paying this type of teacher more money because it's harder, we also want that person to be a male, and they're going to make that much more money too. Take your idea to its extreme. That would make more sense. He does not like single sex schooling. I think a good compromise would be single sex classrooms. Having students completely separated, you only go to a boys' school or a girls' school, I'd be all for that, but I think I could understand why you might have problems with it. But I see no problems with having single sex classrooms, especially for the main academic areas: math, science, English, history. Those 4 subject periods during the day, why not have the gender of the students, the gender of the teacher and the students match? So men teach male English classes, females teach female science classes. They all match. And then throughout the rest of the day, maybe obviously at lunch they can all commingle, or maybe at art class or whatever. But for those key academic areas that we really place a high value on, especially as it extends up into college, maybe they should be single sex. You know, he talks in the book about how boys tend to respond better with male teachers. Okay, well, match the student with the teacher and then put all the boys in there, put all the girls in that other class. The level of distraction would go down immensely. Because, yeah, boys goof around for other boys, but they also goof around to get noticed by girls. And girls do the same things. Girls goof around for girls. They also goof around and act silly because they know the boys are watching them. So separate them. You know, again, I don't know what years that would necessarily be the best for. Maybe from K through 3rd grade, you could have everything mixed like normal. Then at 4th grade, where boys and girls really start acting goofy, you could separate them. Or maybe you could get all the way through elementary school, and by 7th grade, where they start really acting goofy, now it's all single sex classrooms to try to get them a little more focused and help them mature better. I don't know what the solution would be regarding the age level, but single sex classrooms I think would be very, very helpful. When I'm working with a group of boys and it's just me, they're way more focused than if girls are in the room. They just are. And again, I'm a good teacher for boys and girls. You know, girls always like me. And boys always like me too. In fact, girls usually liked me more because of my discipline. My strict standards, girls kind of appreciated more. The boys would be the ones who would rebel against it. But in the long run, the boys always, if they weren't fighting me, they always respected me because they knew I was trying to help them, and they knew this is the right way to do it, that we all need discipline. And I'm a guy's guy, and I know how to talk to boys. And so I'm going to put you on the right path, and here's how we're doing things in my classroom. And yeah, that worked. So I got along with, boys and girls, didn't have a problem in my classes. But if I just had a class of boys myself, those boys would be way better off. They would be much more productive and higher level academically. So I wouldn't discredit single sex education quite so quickly. But again, he's not a teacher. He's never been in a classroom. He doesn't know anything about teaching. Take it from a teacher of 25 years. When men work with boys alone, you can get so much more accomplished than when the girls are around. It's just the way it is. I don't know what happens with female teachers teaching just females. I would assume it's probably a similar case, but I understand the socialization of boys and girls mixing, and so having other parts of the day where that happens could be fine. But single sex classrooms could be a really good idea. Ultimately, as someone who's a libertarian minded, I don't believe in compulsory schooling. I don't believe anyone should be forced to go anywhere. I don't care how old you are. Just like I don't believe in the draft. You shouldn't be forced to go to war. I don't believe a kid should be forced to go to school if he doesn't want to, or that we force parents to send their kids to school. Parents should have the right to raise their children as long as they're not physically harming them or emotionally harming them. Do whatever they want. They don't have to send them anywhere. Because we don't do this with any other part of life. We don't, there are lots of things that would be beneficial for kids because we say, well, we have to send them to school because it's beneficial for them socially, culturally, their future job prospects, whatever the argument is. This is good for them. Therefore, we have to make them do it. It's like, well, there's all sorts of things that are good for kids, but we don't make them do it. Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are good for kids. We don't mandate that every kid in America goes and joins the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts. Little League is really good for kids. We don't mandate that every kid go join their local Little League. So it just doesn't make sense that, school is some special place that's different from every other part of life, that this is the one thing you have to go do. If you're a 7-year-old, you have to go do this. And if your parents don't make you, your parents are going to be in trouble. Like, well, what if the parents want to help their kid learn stuff in a different environment? Or, whatever they want to get their kid to do, or whatever the kid wants to do, I don't really care. But making kids go to school is really the starting point of why we're having so many disastrous things going on, especially in recent decades. Again, this worked for a while because things were different. I'm going to talk about that as I finish up here. But having the mandate that kids have to go to this place, parents automatically feel less responsibility because they go, well, when I send you to school, you're their problem. They deal with you. I'm not responsible for you being well behaved. If you're not behaving in school, well, then they should do something about it. It's not my responsibility if you can't read. That's school. They teach you to read. Let them do it, which is not what should be happening at all. The parents should be ultimately responsible for everything that has to do with their child. So when you forcefully send students away from their parents, well, the parent automatically loses a certain measure of responsibility, and that should never happen. So by forcing parents to have to make the choice on whether or not their kid is going to be educated and how they're going to be educated, and better yet, pay a fee to be educated like every other business you go to, then you have to make really smart decisions on what kind of school you go to, what kind of form of education you want your kid to be taught with, what type of teachers they have. I want my kid to be taught by a man, so we're going to go to this school. Okay, someone will offer that for you. Or if you don't want to do that, okay, now you're responsible for developing your child into a respectable citizen. And however you want to do that is fine. But, by the time they're 13, they better not be criminals because that's on you because you taught them. So whatever it is, compulsory education is a big problem. And if we took that out of the equation, parents would have to be more responsible. And instead of viewing their 8 hours of schooling a day like babysitting, they would now be responsible. Oh, you don't want your kid to go to school? Okay, you watch your kid then. You stay home from work and watch your kid. Well, that's a tough choice that most parents don't want to make because they can't afford to make it. So if you want to really address education, that's just one part of it. Compulsory schooling is a huge problem. That's probably not going to be changed. The single-sex classrooms, though, could be changed. It's also so interesting that, again, this worked in previous generations, but how come we never say throughout the rest of history, well, boys are developmentally slower. They really have problems at school. They're more active. They need to be taught differently. How come that never was a thing until the last 30 years? How come Thomas Jefferson became a genius and he had normal schooling? How come Martin Luther King got all of his degrees? He was very educated. When schooling is so difficult for boys, why is that only now a thing? I don't understand it. So you can't. And he even recognizes in the book. He says that it's weird that boys are now struggling when they're the inheritors of systems that were built by men. Men tended to do a lot of the setting up of formalized schooling, and yet over time it's now become boys who are struggling the most. So it seems kind of weird. It's like, yes, something was successful before that isn't now. What's different? It's not the boys. Boys aren't different. It's our social environment that's different. It's parenting that's different. Technology is different. It's all these influences on the boys that are the difference. The education could still be fine. I'm not saying it's perfect. We always got to look for better ways to educate our kids. But like, how come it worked for the last, 200 years here in America, where we developed some of the most brilliant people who have ever walked the earth and have built this amazing civilization that we have? They were all educated in formalized schooling, and many of them were boys who did it. Most of the big time inventions in human history have been from men. How is that possible if men are always they're delayed in their development and they don't learn that way, and they need active learning, and you need to let them stand up out of their chairs, and like, how come every other boy could do that throughout all of human history? Like, I don't understand. Well, the discipline was different. The parenting was different. The teachers were different. The standards were different. And we've gotten away from those. So again, we're back to like the mental gymnastics of these folks who come up with these policies. We're like, we need to implement this system to affect these types of boys so that we get this type of outcome. It's like, how about you just go back to the basics and say, here's what we're doing. You either do it or you don't. And that's it. Like, it's pretty simple, actually. Teaching is not hard. Parenting is not hard. You just have standards. You have discipline. And things tend to work out pretty well. Well, those things have vanished from the educational environment. So that's where we are. To wrap up everything in this book, okay? Again, labor, education, family, all of that. It's not about what policy you implement. It's not even about good ideas about getting more kids educated or trying to adapt to the workforce and all those things, which, yeah, we always try to do. What is the real thing that fixes almost all of these problems? Again, we're sinful, fallen creatures. We're always going to have problems. But what's our protection against these problems? When moral people get married. Moral people get married. People with values, where they have a respect for their spouse, and they say, I respect you. You respect me. I think we have traits that go together, but also traits that complement each other, so that if I struggle in one area, you can pick it up. If you struggle, I promise to pick you up. And together, we can make our life better together than we could if we were separated. So we're going to stick to those morals or values, whatever you want to call them, where that's how I view my mate, my spouse. And that's how we're going to build our life. When you do that, almost all of these problems can be addressed and fixed. But if you don't want to address families, if you don't want to address how men and women choose their spouse and how everyone can do a better job of that, I kind of mentioned that, well, women are the ones picking men and having these standards that they have to be even richer than they are. Like, well, yeah, the women can change, but the men can pick different types of spouses too. Everyone's involved in this. But that's the solution. Okay, if you want to get boys and men figured out and on the right path to the future, you need moral people coming together in a marriage relationship, raising those boys properly, teaching them discipline and how to be a good citizen and how to take care of other people and how to be smart and how to learn skills and all those things that two parents can do. And then it'll perpetuate itself, because then that kid will grow up knowing what it looks like to be in a good family with two parents who are committed to those values that they have promised to each other. That richer for poorer, sickness and in health, all of that stuff. Yeah, some of us take that seriously. That's the dependence on our spouse that we think about, and we go, yeah, this is the right way to live. And so this is how we're choosing to help our children, whether it's the boys or the girls, come up to be successful, productive people and good citizens and people with good morals who then go have their own good families. Yeah, that's what we do. So make more moral people, encourage people to be more moral and to get married and to view their spouse as someone who's complementary, but also similar. And you'd be amazed at how many social problems would get fixed. But if you're going to jump through all the hoops and go around all those things, go, well, we need to do this for education and have them start later and do this in the working world to adjust the quotas for which people are in which jobs. People will figure all that stuff out if they're raised in a moral household with two people who, again, are committed to helping each other be successful, more successful than they could ever be apart. You do that, we got a better society. It's not easy, but that's the answer. So read of Boys and Men if you would like. That was a long episode, but I had a lot to get to there. Again, I've summarized a lot of it for you. Take a look, see if there's any other holes that you can poke in his arguments. See what you like. Tell me where I've gone wrong. I'm always willing to listen. I was willing to listen to this book, and I'm willing to listen to others. So please lend your voice in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think on this topic of helping boys and eventually men get back on the right track, be more productive, be more moral, be better role models for our young people, and just be successful, good citizens, because we all want that. So take a look at his book if you like. Thanks for watching.